Well, we made it to the Bolshevik Revolution, finally. Volume 26 is the first volume that contains works of Lenin while the Bolsheviks are in power. It contains, because of that, several speeches, memos, and communications, and articles dealing with the Bolshevik Revolution and its immediate aftermath. Because of that, it's impossible to address every source here in a timely manner. So, what I've done is selected a few that I thought were important and kind of highlighted major points. The first quarter of the book contains works on the eve of revolution. In particular, we see Lenin no longer believes in conciliation or working with existing structures, but is calling for a definite seizure of power. In Heroes of Fraud and Mistakes of the Bolsheviks, he states that within the so called Democratic Conference that was held, Bolshevik members of the conference, quote, confined themselves to ironic applause and exclamations, stating that a more effective demonstration of rejection of the conference would have been to walk out. Within the press at the time, there were many skeptics who didn't believe that the Bolsheviks could retain state power had they seized it. In response, Lenin wrote, quote, can the Bolsheviks retain state power? Easy response, in which he begins to reiterate a point that he makes throughout this volume. That is, that the path of Bolshevik longevity can be found in, quote, accounting and control. And by control, he means workers' control of production and the distribution of goods. He says that the state needs to build a cadre of employees, which is easy because capitalism has already simplified the work of accounting and control and reduced it to a comparatively simple system of bookkeeping. In the revision of the party program, he critiques points within Comrade Sokolnikov's draft and the German Spartacus claim that in an era of imperialism, national wars are impossible. Instead, he says this is obviously wrong and that imperialism makes the oppression of nations more acute, and thus national wars are inevitable. In a letter to the Central Committee, Lenin also warns about the activity of comrades Kamenev and Zinoviev. The two comrades made a comment in a non party press paper that opposed an armed uprising. Lenin says this is akin to strike breaking and that the two should be punished for it. Their comments threatened to, in a sense, publicize the Bolshevik plans and foil the entire revolution, and that's why Lenin was so concerned with it. But alas, the defining moment, I guess, of all of these volumes occurred on October 24th, 1917. And the next day, Lenin proudly published to the citizens of Russia that announced the provisional government had been deposed. Immediately after the flurry of decrees calling for an end to the war and publication of secret documents, all of this went to press immediately. Not everything was a bed of roses, though. Many documents in this volume contain communiques between Lenin and the military, moving troops in the navy to Petrograd to prepare for the inevitable counter revolution. In fact, the counter revolution began right away, according to Lenin, as the Bolsheviks invited the SRs and the Mensheviks, two opposition quote unquote socialist parties, to participate in the new government, but they refused. This led critics to say that the Bolsheviks were excluding opposition parties, when in fact their refusal was seen as an act of protest, as few believed the Bolsheviks could retain state power to begin with. Lenin interpreted it as an act of counter revolution. The decrees apply not only to Russia but to the periphery of the empire as well. Making good on their promises, the Bolsheviks granted all nations under the empire sovereignty. But what happened with Ukraine is an interesting case. In Manifesto to the Ukrainian People, with an ultimatum to the Ukrainian Rada, Lenin makes the case that the Rada was acting as a counter revolutionary force, suppressing the working class and the legitimate voice of the Ukrainian Soviets. Therefore, he says that the Bolshevik government refused to recognize the Rada because it was not genuinely a representative body. He says, quote, "We accuse the Rada of conducting behind the screen of national phrase a double-dealing bourgeois policy by refusing to recognize Soviet power in Ukraine." The final topic that I'll bring up from this volume is that of the Constituent Assembly. Lenin argues that the Constituent Assembly is illegitimate because the rules for participation in voting were made under the provisional government with a skewed election lists. This is going to cause a huge controversy later on. To some, the Bolshevik Revolution offered immense opportunity for the Bolsheviks to enact their platform prior to October 24th. However, the early days of Bolshevik power proved harder than initially imagined and confronted the new party in power with a flurry of problems related to the pace of changes and the scale of counter-revolutionary threat and the unwillingness of external forces to negotiate with the new power in Russia. That's all for today. Until the next volume, I'll see you then.